Growing Up Neem-Rooni interview with Kaveh Akbar, author of Martyr. Salam be hamegi and welcome to this Growing Up Neem-Rooni interview with Kaveh Akbar, most recently the author of the fantastic debut novel Martyr. If you haven't heard of this book by now, I will be very surprised because it's been a New York Times bestseller. It shows up on so many best of lists, and not to mention the cover of the book is so hard to miss. It's this beautiful yellow cover with this awesome illustration, and it has an exclamation point in the title, which is rare for a book title. But I absolutely love this book about a young man named Cyrus Shams, so we share a last name, and it's about Cyrus's journey in basically researching and writing about the concept of martyrs. It's about a lot more than that, but that's one part of it. Cyrus is Iranian-American, and he lost his mother to Flight 655, which was an Iranian airliner shot down by the US Navy in 1988, a mistake that no one has ever been held accountable for, let alone the US government. This one event has tremendous repercussions in Cyrus's life, which takes place in the US mostly. But the book is full of so much that many of us in the diaspora can relate to, and I really can't recommend it enough. I had so many questions for Kaveh, I really couldn't fit them all into this one interview, but I loved our conversation, got so much out of it, and I hope that you do too. So with no further ado, my interview with Neem-Rooni, Kaveh Akbar. First, Kaveh, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited that we get to do this.
Yeah, me too. And I'm glad kind of that it's taken us so long to talk because my questions have just been building and building and building. If you see the notes that I have for this discussion, it's just it's all over the place.
That's perfect.
And really, like, I emailed you the other day because I was like, I need to talk to you because so much has been happening over. When did your book come out?
January.
Okay, so the book came out in January. When did you start writing it?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by it. There are lines and images and phrases that are taken from drafts that I wrote, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Wow.
Little images and riffs. But in terms of consciously writing a fiction project that would then become this book, maybe, I don't know, 6-7 years ago.
Wow. And in that 6 and 7 years, like, it's just become more and more and more relevant. And even just reading it, like, since January. So I read it first, then I listened to Ariane's depiction of it, and then I like reread more of it. And the like amount of relevance of it and like the like heartbreak feeling of like reading it again. And I don't mean to get emotional this early on, but it just like I cannot believe this is still like happening and like it becomes more and more relevant, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know how you've been dealing with like everything going on with like these thoughts that you have in the book and the sensitivity that you have.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for spending such generous time with it. It's not a small gift to make yourself open to, permeable to a piece like this.
Yeah.
I'm sincerely grateful for that. It's tremendously moving and affirming, and I've admired you and the work that you do for our community for years. And so to receive that response from you, to receive the gift of your attention is tremendously gratifying. Thank you for it. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the times people talk about timely work or, more than ever, or whatever. And what they mean is, single use or disposable or perishable, right? And to my mind, I mean, this is a book about a plane crash that happened in 1988. This is a book about Feroci. This is a book about the Shahnameh. Like this is not a book that's like about what is happening out the window right now the second, but it is exactly a book about what's happening out the window right now the second because hmm, one of the things that feels really urgent to me as an artist and as just a human being is being able to apprehend the somatic correlative of just the abstraction of casualty data. I think that we get shot atrocity from a fire hose today, right? Like it's just like, what is happening in Lebanon, what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in Sudan, um and we see these casualty numbers, like as of this morning, it was 358 killed in Lebanon thus far, right? And I'm sure that by the time this goes out, that number will be dwarfed by a new number, right? And if that, but when I read that number, it's hard for me, like I can apprehend intellectually, like here in my brain, the difference between 358 and 357 or 359, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that those are different values, but in my head, it's a middle large number. It's bigger than 2, it's smaller than 50,000, right? Like it's in that sort of middle range, and that's how it arrives somatically. And I think that the miracle, I'm getting goosebumps talking about this. I don't mean to be like high off my own, but like I really believe this. The miracle of art making is that it individuates, right? And so you get this story about Cyrus's mother who was on the plane, and um, and she's one of the 290 people killed. But you understand that this one person's life creates this ripple effect where now Ali's life is indelibly changed, and Arash's life, and Cyrus's lovers, and every conversation that he has, and every interaction that any of them have is utterly contingent upon this one person being erased out of time, right? And when you can apprehend that somatically, which is what I hope to do with the book, right? To like make you feel the the magnitude of one life ripped out of time. Um, then you can begin to extrapolate, or you can begin to perceive the magnitude of the thing, right? It's like
Right.
when you see the death tolls of children killed in Gaza, it's this pulverizingly large number. And then I think about, my nieces, right? My younger niece, I'm not going to say her name, but my younger niece, she writes letters to my dog. Like she like writes letters and draws pictures with my dog's name is Galilee after the sea in northern Palestine. But she writes letters to him, not to us, like not to me or my spouse. She writes letters to my dog and then puts them in the mail and sends him letters and pictures all the time, right? And like the way that I love her, the way that she is adored by her family is the way that every one of those children is adored, is loved. And my being able to touch how much I love her you see what I'm saying? Like that
Absolutely.
individuation feels really urgent in a time when the abstraction of casualty data is the fire hose that is like meant to just sort of like numb us to the atrocity. You know what I mean? The difference between 20,000 lives and 30,000 lives, right? Is I mean, it's incalculable, psychospiritually, emotionally, socially,
Exactly.
culturally, but
And
um,
I
yeah.
have a quote too. So let's back up a little bit.
Sorry,
So
I
we're talking.
apologize. I got
I
like right
know.
into it, but
No,
this is
that's
this is like the real stuff.
I know. That's why I'm saying like we have so much to talk about. But just for the people who are listening to this conversation, so we're talking about the book Martyr that just came out in January, and this is a fantastic book. And it's hard to talk about the book. Like the questions that I have give some things away, so I don't want to talk too many details about the book. But there's so much surrounding the book that we can talk about that I'm so excited to ask you about. But the premise of the book is that we have Cyrus Shams, which amazing shares a last name with me.
Hmm.
I'm curious
Yeah.
how you came up with that. But so Cyrus Shams is born in Iran to an Iranian mother and father. and his mother is one of the casualties on Flight 655, which was down in 1988 by the U.S. They just shot it down, never apologized, and actually in the book you'll see a lot of quotes from a lot of unapologetic. Bush has this quote where he's like, "We don't apologize for the U.S. ever," which seems to be constantly policy to this day. But one quote from the book that I really love that kind of encapsulate everything that you just said is Cyrus says, "My mom died for nothing, a rounding error. She had to share her death with 300 other people. My dad died anonymous after spending decades cleaning chicken shit on the corporate farm. I want my life, my death to matter more than that." And I love that, that every time I see these numbers, I do think about this book. I think about that. This is an entire story about all the repercussions, as you said, of these things that happen. But, a lot of us, you were born in Iran too. I want to get into your history, but I thought about that a lot, especially in the past 2 or 3 years. Like, I think the diaspora in general, we all came to different parts of the US or the world, and we've all like been living our lives and doing the best that we can. But when we think about it, like this thing happened in 1979, this like explosion happened that like sent us all over the world at different times. Some people came before that, some people came after that. But how many people like died anonymously on a chicken shit farm, How many people did that happen to? How many people are still bearing the repercussions of that event that took place, this chaos event that took place? And, how many of us, especially like the Massa Amini protests and everything that happened, which I want to ask you about that in terms of martyrs too. Like, I had lots of questions. But I think that that kind of shook a lot of people up into thinking about that original trauma and like thinking about where we are today, why we're here, trying to get back to our roots. And so I think so yes, so we're talking about Martyr, and I'll just say, everyone, please read the book as soon as possible. There's so much in here that I think so many of us will relate to, even if it's not this particular event. But to get into the book, I want to ask, like, when did you first learn about that Flight 655, which happened? Which I guess you started writing this book before this current flight that was just down to the
Yeah.
Ukrainian plane as well, which I want to ask you about that too. So yeah,
Yeah.
when did you first find out about this one
Yeah.
event?
I've known about it for a long time. I don't remember, to be honest, how I think just at some point in high school, maybe Googling just Iran stuff. I don't know. I would just, as one sort of surfs the internet. But when I learned about it, I was fascinated, A, by the fact that I had never heard of it, you know? I was in high school not long after 9/11, and, it seemed not totally dissimilar, like this just hundreds of civilians murdered by, and it seemed strange that I had never heard of this. And then in further researching it and learning about it, speaking with my mom, she was pregnant. The way the timing works out is she was pregnant with me in Iran when this
Oh,
happened. So
wow.
when people were posting pictures of the children who had been, murdered by a U.S. naval warship in Sens, those pictures looked a lot like what her kid might someday look like. She was, and I was just being carried around within her. Not to be too woo woo about it, but I don't know. I mean, like, I'm in there as she's processing this, and it felt very connected to me. That felt very connected, and I think one of the things that is really fascinating to me is that I can speak about this book in front of groups of people. And I, when I talk about this event, you know, most people have never heard of it. Most people are not aware of it. Some older folks might vaguely recall the Vincennes incident or something like that, right? But it's certainly not something that one remembers with vividity or acuity. Uh, but the people who have never heard of it, not once has anyone pulled out a phone and been like, "No way that happened. I would have heard of that."
Right.
The non-shock of it, the fact that it's not at all surprising, the fact that it's kind of just taken for a given that the unpleasant but necessary cost of being a military world superpower is that occasionally you're going to shoot an airplane full of civilians out of the sky is just taken as a given, and that is the part that is really um, fascinating and morally urgent to me. The fact that, again, like 290 people, like thinking about, the ripple that I would leave in my wake, my spouse and my family and, my nieces and my students, and then like extrapolating that outwards 290, it's unimaginable. And it just can't, and like it cannot be a thing that we are like, oh yep, 290, sucks, but
Yeah.
like that can't be how I move through the world.
Right.
And again, I think that this is, the allegory of the elephant, where that you have like all the different people standing around the elephant with,
Yep.
fabric over their eyes, and
Hmm.
the person touching the hide is like, oh, the elephant's all leathery, and the person touching the tusk is like, the elephant's all bony, and the person touching the tail is like, oh, the elephant's all hairy. Like the Iran Air Flight 655 disaster is the part of the elephant that I'm touching, right?
Gotcha.
That's the
Yes.
thing that I can touch and I can speak about. um, you know, Morrison is touching a different part of the elephant. Wolf is touching a different. I'm not saying I'm their peer, but I'm just saying, like when you read, when you're in the libraries, Darwish is touching a different part of the elephant. We're all writers, all artists are touching a part of the elephant. And then when you put our perspectives together, right, you get a sense of like, oh, this seems to be there seems to be a pattern here, right? There seems to
Right.
be some through line, right? And this was just, the Iran Air Flight 655 disaster. I can't write a book that's like, here's the totality of the Iranian experience, but I can touch this one little tiny part, and then hopefully from that very, very individualized experience, people might be able to extrapolate outwards.
Right. So that's that one. But then we also have the backdrop of the Iran-Iraq War in the
Mhm.
book. And so, what about this wild detail that the uncle in the book was this guy who, when the soldiers were dying, so there's this whole idea of martyrdom. And at the time,
Mhm.
if people aren't familiar, during the Iran-Iraq War, what, over a million uh, Iranians were just sent out to
Yeah,
the fields to like detonate landmines,
yeah.
basically. And a lot of times they would get keys around their necks, and it was like, okay, you're going to be a martyr. Like when you do this, you're going to go straight to heaven. You're going to see your family, and so the character in the book Arash was it's the uncle. He would dress up and go as a prophet to these dying people so that as they're dying, they have a little bit of comfort. He can't give them water, which is what they really want, but
Mhm.
he can give them the comfort of like seeing a prophet. So is that true? Is that a thing that happened? And how did you learn about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I have lots of relatives who fought in the Iran-Iraq War. My dad served in the Iranian. I mean, I was born in Iran. If I ever, I mean, I will never be able to go back in this lifetime, but if I ever were to go back, I would have to serve first before I would be arrested for whatever, or vice versa. I don't know. I don't know what order that would happen, um, but um, yeah, this is a story that my dad told me. In fact, I was asking him about those keys. I asked him what the names of the keys were, because um, infantry would be given these keys to wear around their necks called keys to heaven, and I wanted to know what the Persian phrase.
Which would they reuse those keys? Like would they?
Just
Because I
take
mean,
them off.
there must have
I
been
think
like
it was.
millions.
I mean, I don't know, to be honest. One imagines that they'd be maybe given to the families or hung in the mosques or whatever. But yeah, the politicization of the Persian and Shia obsession with martyrdom, Hussein and Ashura, and like the way that um, Iran put a saddle on that, and rode it into this deeply political war with Iraq, which is obvious. I mean, we don't have to get into the entire geopolitics of it, but like after the revolution, Saddam thought Iran was weak and thought there's a famous quote from him where he says, um, I'm gonna kick down the door and the whole house will fall, you know. Um, and Iran Iranians being proud as them to be, made this conflict go on much longer than it needed to and continued it. It's the first war since World War One to use human wave attacks, which is what you were describing, where you just, instead of, laboriously and time consumingly clearing a field of landmines, you just send people out to run over them or the barbed wire fences or whatever. It's also the first war since World War One to use in which mustard gas was used. Something that even Hitler, from his time in the Prussian army in World War One, refused to use in World War Two. I'm not saying. I mean, you understand what,
Yeah.
but like that even one of the world's greatest ghouls historically refused to use. This was used, and I mean, God, I can nosedive on this so much, but like no one believed the Iranian soldiers when they said we're being mustard gassed. We're being mustard gas. There was a documentary crew that was embedded with them that filmed it happening, and
Wow.
the European powers accused them of fabricating the footage. And so what Iran started doing that convinced the rest of the world that this was indeed happening, was sending their mustard gas soldiers to European hospitals and just saying like, okay, then explain this, like just,
Wow. I didn't know that.
yeah. I mean, there's so much. I mean, I don't want to, I wrote, I mean, this book could have been 1,500 pages long, right? I just wrote so much about this stuff, and then trying to be respectful of a reader's time, condensed it to what felt truly essential. But yeah, so these riders who would ride around the dying men after these human wave attacks, according to my dad, truly existed. He told me about it with real acuity. Um,
Wow.
I obviously there's no way to. I've spoken with other people. I've spoken with other people who served, who can have told me similar stories about such men. One could never, Iran would obviously never say, "Oh, of course we sent out these men to pretend to be, the 12th Imam or to pretend to be
Wow.
Ali." So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a journalist. It's not my job. Like I believe my dad believes it, and I believe the other men with whom I've spoken about it, who told similar versions of such a rider existing. And it just feels like such a potent story. I mean, I could have written the entire story just about him, just uncle, who rides around the war day. I mean, what is so interesting to me about that role is that it just would have been another young infantry man, like another
Right.
19-year-old kid who, just finished high school, who's, obsessed with the thing. I mean, I teach, and I teach 19, like they're these burgeoning proto adults, but they're not cooked, they're not fully
Yeah.
cooked yet. And to imagine one of them with the responsibility of like being the angel of death or whatever. I mean, it's so the contrast between the relative immaturity of the individual with the magnitude of the job that has been thrust upon them is really, really vertiginous to me, and that's fascinating.
Right. But yeah, I read somewhere that you said that someone could do their PhD thesis on how the Islamic Republic has like weaponized this idea of martyrdom and how,
Yeah,
it's in our history, but it's something I don't it's interesting to read in this book this like backdrop of all of these martyrs, like, over 1 million from the
yeah,
Iran-Iraq war and then like the 290 and then
yeah.
on and on and
And
on.
and I mean, like it's. I don't want to make it seem like Iran is this like. I mean, I don't have to tell you this, but to be clear, like it's not this ghoulish thing unique to Iran. I mean, like here in
Right.
America, you remember over COVID how we started talking about first responders and healthcare workers and nurses, like,
Right.
oh, we thank you for your sacrifice, just like preparing it's like a secular iteration of the same exact thing, right? It's like
Right.
we're lending this sort of nobility to settle us with the inevitable deaths that will ensue that are totally preventable, that
Right.
are the results of like massive policy and political failure and not a human thing and not a spiritual thing in any way. And it was
Right.
never like we thank, our postal carriers, or we thank our, Burger King employees, or we thank our, daycare worker. It was never like it was only ever doctors and the people or our electric facility worker.
Right,
It was
right.
never them who we were sort of casting into this superhero role, right? And so, I mean, we have our own, in America, have our own sort of secular iterations of this thing of just sort of like
Right.
conditioning people for the inevitable death of a certain population, to defang the political or policy scrutiny that might otherwise occur. We have our own iterations of that here. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, Iran is so backwards and spiritual and whatever that, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty rampant thing.
Right. Well, okay, so let's get back to the book in a little bit, but
Sorry, yeah, I'm all over
so
the
going
place. I
back,
apologize. I really
me
care
too.
about
That's
this
what
stuff.
I was saying. That's why I was saying my notes, which I'll
Yeah,
send you afterwards,
that's
are
cool.
just like crazy topics. But this podcast is called Growing Up Irani, and have you done other Iranian interviews? I tried
Yeah,
to
I did
look
a
a
thing
little bit.
with the Farhang Foundation,
Okay, okay, nice. I'll
which
have
was
to.
really wonderful. And,
Cool.
here and there, I get to speak with other people from the diaspora but no, I mean, this is something, I mean, I've been a fan of yours and the work that you do for years. So
Oh,
this
thank
is
you.
lucky.
Well, so let's go back to the growing up Irani. So you were born in Iran to an American mother and an Iranian father. So tell
Mhm.
me about that. How did that happen? Where what's going on there?
Sure,
In
sure,
after the revolution in Iran, what's
sure.
going on?
Sure. So, my dad came to America after his service, and really did work on poultry farms, but he worked on duck farms. So the book is not autobiographical. But, but yeah, he worked on corporate chicken farms. He worked on like in like the farm corporate duck. He worked on corporate. Sorry, but he would be on the farms that like bred the ducks that you actually ate, not the ducks that like processed the meat, but the ducks that like were the grandparents of the ducks that you eat, which is weird. But there's only like one duck company, so I mean, there's like
Ah.
one duck company that makes like 70%.
So did y'all eat a lot of duck growing up? Like was that
We
a
did, we did.
okay.
Yeah,
What did
yeah.
you make with duck? Like instead of chicken?
Yeah, just yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's like he got it on discount, so it was like cheaper than chicken. But yeah, I don't
That's
know. I mean, it's like it just yeah. I don't eat meat now, but growing up, a duck, or a bird, a chicken was just a machine that converted grain into protein. You know what I mean?
right, right.
But yeah, so but when he came to America, um, my mom was taking a graduate class. Maybe it was an undergrad. I don't even know. Sorry, I should know this. No, it was a graduate class, in poultry science. And there was a day when, they had brought in chickens for this poultry science class to slaughter and then take the
No.
carcass measurement. Yeah,
This is their love origin
this is their
story.
love origin story. And so my dad was like helping with the chickens, and my mom is like, if you saw her, like a stiff breeze could blow her away, and she's like she like went into animal science from veterinarian school or whatever, so she
Okay.
wanted to help animals. So like her like killing this chicken was this really like dramatic, traumatic thing for her, and she was trying to do it gently, which is actually the worst way to do. Like it's like the least humane way to do it because you're just and so my dad went over to her and helped her kill her chicken, and that's how my parents met.
Oh my God.
100%,
What?
100%. Yeah,
That's an amazing
it's a
story.
good meet cute. Yeah, I'm waiting to sell the movie rights to that rom com, but
Wow. Okay.
and within 2 years, my mom spoke and wrote fluent Farsi before ever going to Iran, because my
Wow.
dad's English was still pretty burgeoning.
Oh my gosh.
And so yeah, so they finished school and then went back to Iran. Well, they went to Canada for a second. Had my older brother in
Was he in
Canada.
school too?
Yeah, 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 my
Okay.
dad was in school.
Okay.
Yeah, so they went to Canada for a second. Had my older brother, and then went back to Iran, and lived in Iran for a time. I think the mid to late '80s.
Wow.
And then I was born in '89, and they came back to America in '91, late '91 or
So
'92.
how was that for your mom? I mean, that was like a very dark time, right? Everyone was still
Yeah,
getting used to everything, the
yeah.
hijab. There was like missile sirens going off all the time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, my mom, So my dad has obviously a lot of family there, and so my mom was sort of ensconced in the family compound, and again, like she spoke before she even went to Iran, she spoke fluent Farsi,
Wow.
and I remember being very young before I knew how to read or write in either language. I would dictate letters to my grandparents to her in English, and then she would write them down in Farsi. You
Wow.
know what I mean? Like she's an incredible person. But yeah, I mean, it was, I think that relatively speaking, my parents had it pretty good in Iran because they had gone to school in America and so went to Iran with like this American education and I think that it was a little better for them than it was for a lot of people in Iran.
So
And
she has fond memories of Iran?
yeah.
Okay.
Just being around my family, and I mean, again, like it was literally like a compound. Like my grandparents were the center of the wheel around which the entire family, like second cousins and like everyone just hung out at my grandparents' house. Which is another thing. Now that my grandparents are gone, the whole family has become so much more atomized because it was a thing where if you just like went to my grandparents' house, you'd see everyone over the course of 48 hours, everyone would
Yeah.
come through. And now that they're both passed, there's not that no one has like succeeded them as like that central hub,
Wow. Yeah.
and so, people will go from like house to house to house, but it's not like there's not like just that central spot, which is so
Yeah. Right.
fascinating. And, again, I don't know, I think a lot about our generation and, like we're the generation who is connected to still the generation that can remember a pre-revolution Iran, which was not like this utopia. I mean, I don't mean to paint like pre-revolution Iran as like a place where everything was perfect and everything was great, but like my dad knew every word to every Rolling Stones song before he came to the U.S. and he
Yeah.
spoke no English, but he could sing along to all. He talks about how I forget the name of the show, but there was like some like sort of Casey Kasem top 10 countdown radio show in Iran of
Uh-huh.
like 10 best songs of the week, and he always talks about this time when for the week it was like the week that Under My Thumb by the Rolling Stones came out, and he's how they were like, and the number 10 song this week is Under My Thumb by the Rolling Stones, and the number 9 song for this week is Under My Thumb by the Rolling Stones, and like the entire top 10 was under because it was like such a big hit there, and 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 the Stones
Yeah.
went to Tehran and played, and
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, and so like I mean, it's like as that generation gets older and older, right? Like people we're going to lose firsthand experiences of like what it was like there
Yeah.
then, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the we have all of the stuff about the Shah and his harms, and we have all of the stuff about the new regime and their harms and the revolution, but just the quotidian goofy shit, like
Yeah.
the Under My Thumb being all 10 of the top 10, like that's the sort of like granular story that we're going to lose access to, you know what
Right.
I mean? And that's the stuff that really fascinates me, like that's the stuff that feels like life.
Right. Right. So then where did y'all you left they left Iran finally and then they came
Yeah.
where'd they go to?
We moved around a lot, and so we were in. My mom had some family in Pennsylvania. My mom and I came over like 6 months before my brother and my dad because my brother was in school and my dad was still working and wanted to make a little bit more money. Um, so my mom and I stayed with her family in Pennsylvania for a little bit, and then we moved to New Jersey to this little apartment in Trenton. And that's where my brother and my dad met us. Um,
And y'all didn't have any family there.
no, we didn't have any. I have my dad has a sister in Nebraska now, but at the time it was just the four of us.
So that's
Really,
one
my
thing I
whole
find fascinating too. Like so we moved in 86 to the US. I was 3
Mhm,
and the first time we went back was when I was 9 and I
mhm,
remember getting there and we had a lot of family in Dallas where we moved. Everybody moved. Like
mhm,
my grandparents and all their kids moved to Dallas. But even with that, when I went to Iran, just like you could go outside and like play with other kids, you could walk to the
mhm.
store by yourself. Like as a kid you had so much agency
Yeah,
there
yeah.
and I remember just, like, coming back to the suburbs of, like, Texas and just being like, oh, this is not how humans should live, you know? It's
Uh-huh.
such a shock. So I can't imagine, like, for your father who had this family compound,
Yeah.
all this support, all this. It's like now that I have kids of my own, I feel like it's like that's life on easy mode, and then we've just made it
Yeah.
so hard in this
Yeah.
atomized life, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's just not that sort of civic amongness, like your kid is my kid and my kid, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
maybe there are like little pods of that, and
Yeah.
like writ large, you just don't have that sort of thing here
No.
at all.
Yeah, like cooking together, eating together,
Yeah,
taking care of
yeah,
kids
yeah,
together, all that stuff. Like
hundred%.
you have to be everything all the time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
and
just
and it's like there's so much overlap that just happens because we aren't doing, you know what I mean? Like instead of
yeah,
one person cooking for 10 people one night and the other person, you know what I
exactly.
mean? Like yeah.
What are we
Um,
doing?
yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, it was a culture shock in every direction. My brother obviously was in fifth grade when
Oh
we came
wow.
here. He's 7 years older than me,
Okay.
and so was really struggling in school. You know, English language learning and ESL and stuff like that wasn't what it is now. You know,
Right.
pedagogically or just infrastructurally within the schools. And so, my parents banned speaking Farsi in the household.
Oh wow. Okay. For you too?
Yeah, for all of us. For I mean, my parents would use it when they wanted to talk about like money or secrets or stuff like that
Yeah.
with each other, but and sometimes like kitchen stuff that but like the idea was that it was that my brother was struggling so much in school, and this was a way to hasten his English language acquisition, and which is actually like in ELL. I mean, I have a degree in English education now. In ELL pedagogy, it's not good like because the home at home you're probably not speaking the new language perfectly, and so like you're sort of like whatever, but it's like taking the math homework home, but you do long division wrong, and then you do like 100 problems doing long division wrong, so it gets all the much harder to relearn it, but you can one can understand it as a sort of misguided attempt at being good parents or whatever,
Yeah.
but consequentially both my brother and I mean my brother was 10 when we came here, and so or maybe almost 10. No, he would have been 10. And his Farsi today is about like mine, right? Like we both,
Wow.
I
How is
mean,
his English? Does he speak with an accent?
no, he
Okay.
doesn't. He speaks perfect
Wow.
grammatical English. I mean, he's not a I feel like, and my mom would also, this is in the book, but as something that I put as Cyrus's dad's behavior, but my mom really would get like English SAT books from the library, and they had like a vocabulary bank in the back.
Uh-huh.
She would teach herself all those words and then like pepper them into her vocabulary from us, mostly again for my brother, but like he was just not, he was like a Lego computers sort of guy, and I was like wrapped, it's like I just got the sort of like shrapnel fire of this stuff and became an English professor and a writer, but but I was also the kid at elementary school or kindergarten or whatever who was like, I'm ambiguous about whether I want the peanut butter crackers or the cheese cracker. You know what I mean? Like I just had these big words that I didn't
Yeah.
know, that I didn't know were words that you weren't really supposed to use.
Right.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I learned to write English concurrently with learning to speak it too. And so I have like actual like I mean my mom has like a chapter book that I wrote when I was 5, like with like full,
Wow.
because like as I was learning the vocabulary of English, I was also learning the orthography like concurrently, right? Which isn't normally how it works, but um, uh, so I don't know. I think it sort of conditioned me in this sort of like weird Goldilocks way to be a writer, like right from the jump.
Yeah. So then what happened with your relationship with the Persian language? It
Uh-huh.
just
Yeah.
ended?
Yeah, it well, it didn't end. I mean, it's still it was one of those things growing up where again, I didn't know another Iranian person outside of the four of us.
Okay.
I mean, my aunt came and visited us once, but we weren't like plane ticket rich. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, it's funny now because I'm on planes all the time because of what I do. I have to travel. I get to travel a lot and I
Yeah.
get to meet people and the like. But I wasn't on a plane until after we came to America. I had never been on a plane until I turned 18.
Right.
And I didn't meet my first Iranian person outside of my immediate family. My aunt came and visited us once in when we were living in Indiana. So I guess for like a week, but that excluded, I didn't meet my first Iranian person until I went to college, right? And
Wow.
so,
Well, so what was your relationship with being Iranian? Like, what
mhm,
did that mean to you? So your dad's not speaking Farsi anymore.
correct.
And usually the moms are kind of the holders of the tradition, so like
And my
Nowruz and
mom
all
was
that kind of
white,
stuff.
and so
Yeah.
she
So
was.
what?
Well, and my dad also. I mean, I don't know if this was your experience or has been your experience, but I find, I mean, in like any binary, this is reductive, but it is often the case that I have found that people who have family who came here pre-revolution, were super assimilationist and super like, wanting to, just blend in and be white passing as best
Yeah.
as they could, and then people who came after the revolution are much more like greatest civilization on earth and we have to preserve, you know what I mean, like this shit.
Yeah.
And so my dad came here pre-revolution
Right.
first and then went back to Iran. But so, I mean, to this day his favorite restaurant is Long John Silver's. He loves KFC, he loves the Rolling Stone, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
he get my brother and I both have white middle names, and they're both like just cowboy. Like my full name is Kaveh Akbar, Gene. My brother's R.S. Roy Akbar, right? Like in case the race wars ever come and we have to like blend in or whatever. I don't know, But
Yeah.
um, I've never gone by Gene a day in my life. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
it's silly, but I say this to say like I definitely had the assimilationist dad. And so my mom was really the one who was like, by the way, you're Persian. But also, sorry, I don't mean to, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but this is just
This is exactly
fascinating.
what I want to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So,
very
but
rich.
also because my dad was here during like the Contra crisis and this and that, he received a lot of, I mean, his bank funds were frozen, all this stuff.
Wow.
And so he was very, very paranoid about anti-Iranian sentiment or whatever.
Does he look Iranian?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he's dark
Okay.
skinned, Bandari,
Oh,
like
wow.
very,
Okay.
like he would never. His name is Muhammad. Like his he which he
Not Mo?
no never what, but he
Okay.
went by MK. He
Okay.
he would often go by MK
Okay.
because Muhammad Kareem goes to MK.
Gotcha.
As if
Yeah.
like MK Akbar is somehow less ethnic, but but yeah, I mean, and so I say this to say like we were told like don't tell anyone in school that you're Iranian. don't
Right.
don't mention if someone asks you where you're from, just say you don't remember, like which he would really do because
Wow.
when the race is sort of like where are you really from, he'd be just like I don't remember, like people
Whoa.
would be yeah, I mean it was he's a character, um, so that part was really suppressed. And then I think when I went to college, I kind of overcorrected a little bit. I was like, greatest civilization on earth, like really connecting with,
Were
and it's
there,
still
who were the other Iranians? Like, was there an Iranian
just
Students Association or something?
no,
Or,
it was. I mean, this also. I mean, my story, and I talk about. Or I mean, it's a novel, but I also am an addict. I've been sober for 11 years, but this is also the part of my story where it starts to get into that stuff, and so
yeah.
I was not the sort of person who, um, uh, you know, went to. I actually did go to SJP meetings, Students for Justice in Palestine, even like through my dense fog of not knowing what was going on and self obsession, as I was in active addiction. But I didn't. I mean, I was a terrible student. I cheated and manipulated my way through my undergrad, and just never went to classes. Um, so yeah, I wasn't involved in that sort of thing, but just people I'd meet at the bars or at shows. I mean, my this is maybe a dark detail, but it's funny to me. My heroin dealer had a Zulfikar tattoo, like the Hazrat Ali's sword. That's because he was. I mean, it's like it's insane to like find these weird little. I hope that doesn't out.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll happen. But it's yeah, I mean it's insane like everyone thinks of Iranians in America as like the doctors or the engineers or the Shahs of Sunset or whatever, but like we're also doing manual labor on duck farms and getting addicted to drugs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
I think that that's something that is really interesting to me too. Like
Yes. Oh my gosh, that reminds me, not to throw shade on anything, but there's this one thing that the guy is like, say something about Iranians in English that keeps popping up on my feed all the time.
Mhm.
And then his guests are always like, Iranians are the most amazing people in the world and hardworking and this and this and this. And like goes on about how great Iranians are, like you're saying, greatest civilization, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but they're also like manipulative liar, all this
Yeah,
like we're
we're human
everything.
beings. Yeah,
We're
yeah,
human, exactly.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
we're this and we're that. Which actually, Jon Stewart, when he made a movie with Iranians, someone asked him, like an Iranian was like, "Tell us what you think about Iranians," wanting him to be like, "I think they're the greatest people on earth," and
Uh-huh.
given an unfair. And he said that answer, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, okay,
Yeah,
thank you." Like, yes, we are all these things.
yeah,
Like all
100%.
of us are all these things. Like we don't need to like.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that.
Isolating Iranianness to any single category is as absurd as I mean, it's just, we're people, we're human beings, like we
Yeah.
come from, like I don't know that there's like, there are cultural things, like I think that probably there's just more poetry in the air, just in the, maybe, like there are little things here and there, but I mean, to try to like attach some moral correlative to it or some, you know,
Right.
I don't know. I hope that the book shows Iranians doing the wrong drugs and fucking the wrong people, and as much as it does
Yeah.
like the Shahnameh, Hafez, like
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
55 stuff.
But yeah, so this is such an Iranian book, and there's so much about Iran in here. And so when did that like kind of come to you? Like when did you start getting so into the history and into the language and and what is your relationship with the language and the
Yeah.
traditions at this point? Like, do you
Yeah, well,
celebrate
you've
Nowruz or?
helped with the language stuff.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, I have a Farsi tutor. I'm never gonna, again, I can't go back to Iran, so I'll never be like a truly fluent speaker the way that one might be. I can read it actually better than I can
Mm,
understand it, and I can read it better than I can speak it. Like, and because I can go slow and take my time with the reading. And that's something that I can actually sort of study on my own. I know that you give us great tools with which to improve our, but yeah, I mean, so my Farsi is not good. My French is better than my Farsi because I could study that academically and never studied it in an institution. Um, and I can go to France, so I've been able to,
right.
but yeah, I mean, my relationship, I mean, it came into the book because, there's a sister verse where I never left Iran, and I'm, that version of me still exists somewhere, right? I mean, and more to the point, even like, uh, if the Chomskyan neurolinguists are to be believed, your mind is terraformed by your first language, not just semantically, not just for speech and language, but like the patterns of your cognition and the ways that you organize and make sense of the data that comes in via your sensory apparatus is all terraformed by your first language in ways that, like for instance, uh like native speakers of like native English speakers, if you give that, like if I gave my dad a picture of me as a baby, a picture of me graduating high school, and a picture of me today, I would organize and I said like put these in order of time. Like I would say baby me is on the left, high school me is in the middle, and then present day me is on the right. My dad would do it the opposite way, right? Because one's perception of the order of time matches one's perception of the sort of written language that you know what I mean that one speaks, right? Or of what the written first language, right? Unless one sort of like consciously intervenes against it and it's like, okay, well, this will. But like, so like native speakers of right to left languages picture time moving right to left. You know what I mean? And so like
Yeah.
that's one tiny part of that elephant that I can touch, right? Like
Yep.
that's a difference that I can touch, but like it's impossible to imagine the billion trillion ways that is inflecting me that I can't touch. You know what I mean?
Well, I
Um,
can't believe we've gotten this far into it without mentioning poetry, but you are a poet and you declared yourself a poet at 14 and probably thought it long before that. So tell me, what do you think your history, your makeup of your being Iranian plays into that? Like, how do you think Iranianness has come into your poetry?
Yeah, I
Being
mean,
a
again,
poet, I mean, all Iranians are kind of speaking poetry and are
sure.
kind
I
of
mean, it's a
poets,
very
right?
poetic language. And poetic is one of my least favorite
Yeah.
adjectives because it just people use it to mean pretty, which I don't think. I mean, I don't think a poem has to be pretty at all. I think.
What is poetic then?
Yeah,
What's the
well,
definition?
so by poetic, I mean it's very just the language is very symbolic, right? Like
Yes.
if I say like "deram brateng shode," right? Like this is sorry, I know my pronunciation is terrible, but
It's
uh,
do not worry, it's amazing.
yeah, but
That's well, I want to caveat there and say that's one problem with like Iranians in general is like it's so if an Iranian is speaking English and has an accent, like we all are very gracious and we're like, oh, awesome, you're fine. And I think the other way around should be completely the same. You know,
I
just the
appreciate
fact that you're trying
yeah,
is
I
like amazing.
appreciate that. Yeah, I'm grateful for that generosity. I wish it was more universal.
I know, I know.
But like if I say that I'm bateng shode, I am like if I wanted to translate that to English, I would say I miss you, right? But then that completely elides, the fact that we're talking about a heart, right? Like that, like the Persian has a heart in this image. The Farsi has a heart in this image. The Farsi, my heart tightens for you. My heart grows tight for you, right?
Yeah,
But if I translate it to my heart grows tight for you, then it sounds way more floral than it feels in Farsi. You see what I'm
right.
you see what I'm saying? So like neither way is exactly correct, right?
Right.
Like you can't say I miss you because then you elide the what is literally being said, but you can't say my heart tightens for you or whatever, my heart constricts for you, or suddenly now it sounds like you're trying to sound way more poetic than it actually feels in Farsi, you know? And so there's something like constitutionally and there are so many constructions in Persian like that,
Yes.
like the colors all being named after the things that you know what I mean, like there's so many
Yeah.
constructions in Farsi that are functionally symbolic, that are not, just like the sort of utilitarian, this word means this word means this, but are actually sort of reaching out a little bit beyond towards more esoteric associations, right, which is
Yeah.
what I mean by poetic, right? And so you're fundamentally working with this material that is imbued with poetry, like with symbolic and metaphorical valences, right? And so it's a language that obviously historically has lent itself well to poetry, right?
Mhm.
You think of Saadi or Hafez or Rumi or, even Farrokhzad or, I mean, like whoever you want to point to, it's one of the great traditions of Persian society, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it. And even people like my dad has never, I don't think, in his life read a book for fun. Certainly not after he left school. And still, there are, when you speak about Saadi or Hafez, like there's a certain reverence that you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
just the most like boots on the ground, like unhoity-toity man that you will ever meet, like arms crisscrossed with farm scars, like
Yeah.
still has this like I'm getting goosebumps talking about him, but like
Yeah.
but like there's still this sort of reverence and regard for poetry, right? And that
Yeah.
that is something that I don't think there's any correlative for in America, right? Like
No.
I don't think that any art has like such a deep like just anyone on the street, like no matter who you're talking to, is like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, that's some
That
serious business.
it's wild to me because yeah, there's an interview with you where the title is Poetry is Alive and Well and you're talking about how, there is a appetite for it here in the US.
Yeah.
But my question is just like I mean, the more I get into it, so I have a whole poetry program and I talk about poetry and all this stuff about Persian poetry,
Mhm.
and it is just wild to me that yeah, it is a part of the fabric of every single person in Iran. They
Mhm.
have poems memorized
Yeah.
and there's just no equivalence for that in English. There's a little bit with Shakespeare, but that's kind of like
Sure. Yeah.
a little bit, where
Yeah, but
maybe you
even
have one or
that is
two.
sort of
Even
like
that.
the class thing. Like you wouldn't go into like I used to drive forklifts at a Subaru factory, right? And like I
Yeah.
wouldn't, there weren't many guys with whom I worked at that job who
Yeah.
I would try that with, and if I did, it would feel to me to be like condescending, or like I was like
Right.
patronizing, or I was trying to make, you know what I mean? Whereas it feels much more classless in Persian,
Yes,
in
completely.
you know, like the idea that this is just like in the air, like it's
Yes,
just
and it's not pretentious like you said.
yeah,
It's not like
exactly, exactly.
someone being like, "Oh, it's an everyday person."
Yeah.
So then did that come into play at 14 when you were like, "I'm a poet?"
Mhm.
Like, what is a poet? What did you think a poet was?
No, no, it actually didn't. When I had a seminal high school English teacher, like a lot of writers, who handed me a stack of American poetry, and I mean, I was just like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever. And then it wasn't until quite a bit later, really, that I made the connection. But it's interesting too because, um, excuse me, in I went to India a few years ago for to do some poetry reading, and a bunch of people asked me if my name was my real name because Kavi
Yeah.
in Hindi means poet, and Akbar obviously means great, right? And so it was like I was just
Wow.
walking around calling myself great poet. And everyone just thought that I had like made this name up to call myself because
Whoa.
I was the poet there doing poetry stuff, right? But it
Okay.
does feel again like, I mean, not to be too like woo woo about it. I mean, to my parents, obviously Kaveh is a very Iranian name, you know, like a
Yeah.
very like nuts and bolts sort of, you know, Iranian name, um but it does feel like there's been this conspiracy from the way that I learned English to, you know, just this poetry being in the air, even in our
Yeah.
fairly sort of like agricultural, not at all hoity-toity house,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
wild.
and
And another funny thing is, I read a quote from you that said, "My thesis advisor during my MFA told me I only write three kinds of poems: sex poems, God poems, and addiction poems." And this to me was fascinating because doing this project, so we've done poetry with Hafez, Sadi, Rumi, and that's exactly what those poems are about. Like
100%,
exactly
100%.
just that, and like very literally too. Like
Mhm,
you mentioned somewhere too, just like the concept of drunkenness comes up in basically every single Iranian poem.
mhm.
Some of them are just like super, and you talk to a lot of Iranians now and they're like, no, 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 we're just talking about God. We're just talking about God.
Uh-huh,
So,
uh-huh.
okay, fine. You're talking about God, but you're also like, Rumi is also talking very explicitly about his lover, you know?
Yeah.
He's talking very explicitly about going into the wine house and drinking wine. It's not just about God.
Yeah.
You can read that into it too, but how does that like do you feel like you make a connection with that with like our great tradition of poetry, Iranian poetry?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they were all. I mean, Rumi and Hafez certainly love wine. I mean, and this is not even unique to the Persian. I mean, like Homer talks so lovingly about wine, like the wine dark sea. You know what I mean? Like this is there's a tradition of finding some intoxicant that thins the veil between you and some divine that is otherwise sort of kept away from your conscious apparatus. That said, you know, I also think that, you know, you can press the button too much or too hard, and then suddenly it stops helping you, as it was in my case. But yeah, I mean, I also think that just being in a place of alterity, being in a place of perceiving yourself to be on the outside looking in, is a valuable perspective to have for an artist, even if it's painful in an artist's living, right? Because, you know, if you're sitting at the table fully fed, you know, drinking from your golden goblet by the roaring fire, right? All of these things feel very normal, right? Like it feels good that you should have all of these things. Whereas if you're on the outside with your face pressed to the glass, hungry, getting rained on, right? It seems very strange that that person should have so much while you have so little, right? And
Right.
so this place of alterity, this place of sensing yourself to be outside looking in, is a valuable perspective because you can write about the strangeness of the scene that might be lost to the person held within it, right? It's like the difference between trying to describe a cloud from inside a cloud versus trying to describe a cloud from standing on the ground, right? And so I think that it is often the case that great artists perceive themselves to be occupying a station of alterity and outside looking ininess. it is also often the case that that correlates with, you know, the things that we as human beings do to ameliorate the pain of that station, right? Which is substance use, and there are any number of addictions that can be sort of palliative, but I think that there is an actual like sort of craft reason why those things correlate. It's not just like, oh, being a drunk makes you wise, or what, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I think that there's a craft reason why you find those correlations through time.
That's interesting. Yeah, I actually I had a meeting with a friend, an artist here in town, Elizabeth Chapin, a really wonderful artist
Mhm.
who I was she this is one of her favorite books, so I was like, "Oh, can we get together so I can ask you some questions?"
Mm.
And I had all these questions about the book, and then she's in recovery, and she was like, "This is the best book I've ever read about recovery." I was
Oh,
like,
that's incredible.
"Oh, wow. Okay, none of my questions related to that. Wow, I like picked up on a totally different like thing of it from my own experience." Okay, and she told me all, her perspective of it and
Mhm.
like her favorite passages, and it was incredible to hear it from that. And I think all great art is like that. Like everyone really can get so much out of it from their own perspective. And for me, it was all the the things about parenthood. I had a lot of questions about that and like the whole concept of like trauma and like
Mhm.
the numbers that you had and all
Mhm.
those other things. But I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think that when you put, I mean, like the center of the Venn diagram of identities in this book is like a queer Iranian Muslimish person who grew up mostly in the American Midwest and became an addict and got sober and then became a poet. Like that
right,
that is the perspective of the main character of the book. And if you do that Venn diagram, it's basically like one person in the intersection, right? Like, and
right,
I think that this is again the kind of miracle of art is that if you get really, really, really specific, right? Like a lot of the times I'll be talking to my students and they're like, oh, I made it general so that everyone could see themselves in it, right? And I feel like art
right.
actually kind of works the opposite way,
That's
right? It's
so
like
interesting.
I can write this book that is like so granular to my specific experience that there's really no overlap with anyone else's. This is like
Right.
my unprecedented experience of life on the planet Earth. But then you can read it and see all of these valences of Persianness, and your friend can read it and see all of these valences of recovery stuff, and and that's the
Yeah.
miracle of art.
Which brings us back to the point that we were talking about in the very beginning where, these numbers, this 290,
Mhm,
289, but it's this like one that you can write an entire book about and,
mhm,
get this experience of understanding these big numbers. Um, but I also want to ask you about, so I have also been reading a lot of your quotes about like alcoholism and everything and about how like you poetry happens like when you're quiet and you like
mhm.
need these sense and everything that I was reading, I was like, okay, I don't have the experience of being addicted, but everything that I'm reading, I'm like, I don't have that quiet because of my experience with social media. And I feel
Sure,
like,
sure.
I feel like we're all just walking around just with this kind of more accepted, like everybody is completely like upset or addicted at this point and
Mhm,
has no sense of quiet. So I
mhm,
wanted to ask you about that. I had this actually another quote that you had that I want to read that I thought was really good. He said, "Between writing the two books, I had gotten off of all social media. I don't mean to speak prescriptively, but for me, it was really insidious how that shit colonized my mind and colonized the algorithms of my thinking and hijacked my rage. On social media, the same rhetorical language was being used about the casting of some Marvel movie as about the leveling of a village in Syria. The same exact rhetorical algorithms of outrage were used to talk about one as the other. Our brains haven't evolved enough to differentiate between the two. Language is language." So and you talk about recalibrating. And so I really related with that. I thought that was really interesting. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like now you are in recovery. Like what is your relationship with social media at this point and the
mhm.
relationship with quiet and also how you think that people should experience poetry, like in what state? Because I find that it's like being addicted to social media and phones and blah blah. It's really hard to make space for even reading poetry, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that and thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that you're articulating something that a lot of people experience and that a lot of people are sort of passively like, oh, yeah, I wish but I need it
Oh,
for parties or event invites or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I got back on social media. I'm on just Instagram, but as you know, I wanted this book to help find its people, and so I, you know, get on there and bang my pots and pans, and of course now I'm just on there again, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens, right? I mean, like our brains aren't evolved enough to differentiate between what's happening on our phone and what's happening right in front of us, right? And so,
Yeah.
evolutionarily, our brains learn to privilege in potentially harmful sensory data, right? Like if we see a tiger in the bush, it's much more urgent to us in terms of survival than the fact that there are lovely berries on the bush or the fact that it's a sunny day, right? And social media knows that and has weaponized that, right? Like I mean, they have teams of psychologists and engineers, and so like what your endless scroll is showing you is like tiger in the bush, tiger in the bush, tiger in the bush, right? Because your
Yeah.
brain, again, like it doesn't distinguish between you know phones, technology, electricity hasn't been around an evolutionarily significant amount of time, right? And so all our brains are getting is like there is a existential threat to you right now, this second,
Yeah.
and when you see that cut between an ad for Charmin and an ad for the new Marvel movie, and then an autoplay snuff film of unarmed civilians in Gaza, and then an NFL score, and then like a quippy bon mot from a casual acquaintance, right?
Yeah.
It's That's empire teaching you to treat all of those things as coeval, right? Like just teaching you
Right.
that you can just scroll right past all of those things and not think too hard about them, right? Which sort of denudes the middle thing of its urgency, right? And it's also then tricking your brain into thinking, like at a deeper level, like that nothing is safe, right? Like you can't even look at a Charmin ad without there being a tiger in the bush. You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which I think then creates something that is a little bit problematic to me where we begin to equate, and by we I mean like people like you and I who are here in America, who obviously like the outrage and the just sort of like pulverizing despair that I feel when I look at numbers from Gaza or from Lebanon or from Sudan. um, when I look at those numbers, the outrage that I feel is still so much nicer than the mortal terror that a Gazan mother feels. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like from the vantage point of her mortal terror for her life and for her children's lives, my comfortable outrage is so luxurious. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think that there's also a way in which social media invites one to create a sort of like equivalency between the despair that I'm feeling and it's like, oh, we've all got it so bad and like the world is so, and it's like, no, 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 I'm fine, like I'm gonna walk my dog
Yeah.
after this conversation. And that delta between my comfort, my outrage, and her mortal terror, it has to be leveraged into something. Like I if I'm standing on this plane of relative privilege, right? Where people who pray like me or people who look like me or look like my uncles are being slaughtered. Um, but I am in no immediate danger of that happening to me. Then I'm the one who has then a responsibility incumbent upon me, right?
Right. Right.
Sorry, I don't, I don't mean to go like super, super heavy. I mean, I think that I think that social media is like it's like smoking, right? Like the
Yeah.
science is out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the science is clearer now than in terms of its deleterious effect on
Yeah.
our mentals. And also, I mean, God, I don't want to just turn into an old man shouting at the clouds, but like in agriculture, my dad taught me this. Like you can't like abattoirs and slaughterhouses are designed around like when you slaughter a cow, you can't let it you can't let the cow behind it see the cow that's being slaughtered.
Right.
Otherwise, that the cow that's about to be slaughtered, it releases stress hormones and it spoils the meat, right? So all abattoirs and slaughterhouses are designed around this principle where the animal that is being slaughtered is hidden from all the other animals, right? Like they don't
Yeah.
see that happening, which is also how halal meat is, which is sort of tangential, but I say this to say, again, when we human animals are seeing autoplay snuff films every single day I
Yeah.
see charred corpses of Palestinian children, and I see, and again, my brain can't distinguish between this happening on a cell phone and this happening like immediately in front of me, right?
Yeah.
Photography hasn't been around an evolutionarily significant amount of time, right? Let alone autoplay videos of it happening, right?
Right.
All my brain sees is the animal in front of me being slaughtered. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so what does that do to our meat? You know what I mean? Like I'm not
Right.
a neuroscientist. I can't, I'm a writer, but it can't be inert. You know what I mean? Like we're
Right.
not so different than the cow or the lamb or the goat or whatever that it makes their meat inedible, and it just doesn't touch our meat, right? Like it has to be having an actual like physiological corrosive effect, right? And again,
Right.
I'm not a doctor. It's not for me to like speculate about like what that might.
Well, well, this relates to what you write in your book about how the Cyrus is an actor for um having doctors like given the news that someone's died, and it says that in the book where you're acting but your brain can't differentiate between
Yeah,
acting and like that actually going
yeah.
through that experience. But what is the and I think this is super important to talk about because I do think this as I'm reading like all of your interviews about that sense of quiet and about like I feel like social media is the opposite of poetry. Like it doesn't leave room for poetry. Like you just can't have the two. So I that's why I wanted to like
Yeah,
particularly talk
yeah.
to you about it. But what is the answer then? I mean, we have to like be aware of what's happening. Like what's your balance?
Well, luckily, nobody is coming to me for answers, and if they did, they'd leave
I
slowly disappointed. Because I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, I'm. If you do as I did, if you do as I've done, it's not going to work out well.
am.
I mean,
Okay.
like I'm still as much a work in progress as anyone, um, but yeah, I mean, poetry fundamentally asks us to slow down our metabolization,
Yes.
right? Like this is there's no poem that you read as quickly as you read your endless scroll, right?
Yes.
There's no poem that you read as quickly as you even read prose, right? And so that in and of itself feels pretty antithetical to the algorithms of social media, which incentivize just seeing everything as quickly as possible. I mean, what social media wants is attention that's a mile wide and an inch deep, right?
Yes.
And poetry wants, a mile deep for a long time. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they're quite opposite modes of contemplation. And so I actually think that exercising the poetry muscle, where you just like, put your phone in another room and sit down with a book or a poem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't mean this, I don't want to sound like I'm like, oh, poetry will save us all. But I do think like as a channel of action among all other channels, right? It can exercise some muscles in the brain that actually have pretty urgent moral correlatives, right? The ability
Love
to
it. Yeah.
sustain rage about Gaza, right? When every actor involved in that wholesale slaughter is banking on us getting tired and us getting frustrated and,
Yeah.
us burning out, right? The stamina the stamina of attention that one builds through poetry I mean, like I said, I've been going to SJP meetings since I was in my late teens. I understand that this is a since
Yeah.
1948, right? People have been having these conversations and these rallies and these marches, and
Yes.
it is a long game, and all the bad guys are banking on people's fatigue and people's and again, I mean, as one channel among many, like our lawyers and our grant writers and our teachers and there are a lot of people doing wonderful work as well, but
Yes.
as one channel among many, I do believe that art, writing, poetry has its place.
Okay, I love that. I think that's great. And I want to pitch this book, Portrait of the Alcoholic. It has a really good uh poem in here that I think that our listeners will relate to called Do You Speak Persian? That's a lot of fun, especially
And
if
it
you
has
can.
Dilembret Tingshada in it.
It does, exactly. Yeah. And I want to say you have another poem that I don't know which collection it's in, but it's the Reading
Reading
Farrokhzad
kind of,
in.
yeah, it's in
Yeah,
Pilgrim.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which collection is it in?
A book called Pilgrim Bell.
Okay, Pilgrim Bell. Yeah, that's right. But it's funny because in the poetry program we have one thing that we do is like it's impossible to translate poetry, you know. But you have a line in here that says that the whole poem is kind of based around, and it's ما هر چه را که باید از دست داده باشیم از دست دادیم. And you have a couple different translations for this, which like you type it in the translation app and it's we have lost everything we need to lose. But then your father says we have lost whatever we had to lose. And it's such a small difference, but I read these and both of these are like inadequate because one of the things that I say about Persian, the language, and about poetry is I feel like the theme of Persian is why say less when you can say more. Always, you know.
Well, you lose the hands in both translations, right? Like you use
as das dadim means it went from my hands. That's a really good point. But it's also ما هر چه که باید از دست داده باشیم. We don't need that many words to say this thing, but it's like whatever we should have or we must have lost, we have lost. You know? But it's like you would need so many English words to.
Yeah, and it would just sound clunky with rhetorical argle. Yeah, but it doesn't in the Persian.
But kind of back to this idea of space and time and slowness, like Persian requires a lot of meandering and like going and like slowly getting to your point. So I really enjoy that.
Yeah, but, it's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, so that's also a really good poem. I'll link to it on this. But I guess for my final question, I've taken a lot of your time. Sorry.
No, I thank you so much for being so generous with your time and generous with your attention. It's not.
Of course. But what is so you've said several times, like you can't go back to Iran. Like, what is I guess we didn't even talk about one thing maybe I do have another kind of big question. So you were in the process of writing this book when the whole, the Women Life Freedom protest happened. So what was your experience with that? Like what happened during that time? And was that while you were writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, of course it was, I was working on the book, just the same obliterating heartbreak that everyone felt. And also, I don't know what your experience of this was, but I felt despair where others felt hope. I remember feeling so cynical about it. I remember feeling like this is incredible, but they're just going to, I already know that the Iranian people hate this shit. And I already knew that. And now these people, I didn't think, I don't know. I don't want to sound so despairing, but it just seems like one side has all the guns and all the prisons and all the and then the other ones are beautiful, passionate people with real feelings. But I don't know. And then now you still see today, like every week you see another person hanged for their role.
I think it must have been so interesting to you to just kind of a mindfuck for you while you were writing this book that this whole thing began with the kind of martyrdom of one person. That's kind of the part that I'm cynical about all the time. Like whenever these things happen, all of a sudden this person becomes this martyr and their name is everywhere and it's over and over. Yeah. And she didn't want to be a martyr. Like she was just.
And that's such an important detail to me, right?
Yeah.
It's like I don't know. It's not, I wrote a book about what the word martyr means and I still don't know that I have a ton of clarity, but it does feel to me like part of the idea of martyrdom is that you willfully submit to something greater than yourself, right? And she didn't willfully, I remember when George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, Nancy Pelosi went on whatever C-SPAN and said, every American thanks George Floyd for his sacrifice.
Yes.
He was murdered. You know what I mean? Like saying sacrifice is like someone made a principled decision. Like George Floyd was murdered. You know what I mean? Hassan was murdered, right?
Yes.
Like and to like hang some august mantle on it only elides the human violence of you know what I mean? It wasn't some cosmic thing where this person was chosen by God on a mission to whatever. It's because there's a misogynistic regime that kills women. You know what I mean? And I don't mean to diminish her significance in any way. I just think that like it can often be used as a tool to sort of like cudgel us into complacency or a sense of
Yes.
inevitability around things
Yes.
that are not at all inevitable, that are in fact the result of very human actors believing themselves to be able to operate with impunity, right?
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, God, it's so hard. I mean, I was writing about a woman in Orchide who is a kind of martyr to my mind, a living martyr, to my mind and to Cyrus's mind, a kind of living martyr. But I also, in the book, think that there's an argument to be made for Arash being a martyr despite his being alive,
Right.
for Ali's being a martyr despite him sort of just having a rolling ellipses of a death
Yeah.
instead of the staccato exclamation point of that we associate with martyrs, right?
Right.
Um, and yeah, and so I was heartened, and also I know that when people feel very, very hopeful, and then that hope um isn't allowed to sublimate into fruition, I know that it can often sort of like turn into despair and hopelessness, right?
Hmm.
And so I feel like I don't know, there was a lot of me that felt a lot of tenderness towards like what these people would be experiencing in 2 3 years, right? When again it just seemed like this immovable object that they were up against. And I understand, I mean, like, I understand, empires crumble, but um I don't know, we saw it around the Ahmadinejad election, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there have been other iterations of this thing, and like I don't think anyone in the world believes that Iranian citizens, you know are writ large are happy under this regime, right?
Right.
I think that, but and it's also, sorry, I don't mean to keep going on this, but it's also this thing where, because of the revolution, when the MI6 and the CIA sort of like really in material substantial ways fomented a revolution that led to this regime being in power, the people are understandably skeptical of international intervention, right? I mean, I would be
Yeah.
too. And it's like so many of my friends were like, "What can we do to help in this moment?" And it's like, just understand that it's like not your business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they don't want your help. They want you to be talking about it. They want you to know about it. But this is not like a
Right.
thing where you can fly over there and make it better. This is not an opportunity for some fucking white savior shit. Like
Right.
this is they've had enough of that.
Yeah, but it's wild, like, I mean, the timing of it, the idea that it's called martyr, and I love that distinction that you made where, like, there are martyrs that chose to be martyrs and then martyrs that we like, yeah, this poor woman, now we have, like, billboards of her
Yeah,
everywhere and this and that and that,
yeah,
and I'm like, "She did not want that." Like, I'm
yeah.
I'm super uncomfortable with all of that because, yeah, it's an unwilling like, someone who just wanted to have a good day in Tehran, that's it.
100%. And that's
Jeez.
the and like I want her to retain that humanity, right? Like she
Yes.
wasn't some
Yeah.
superhero
Your
avenger who was
sacrifice
like,
won't be in vain. It's like,
yeah, yeah,
"Ah."
yeah,
It
yeah.
was
And
not
it's
her.
like I hope her death won't be in vain. But again, like
Exactly.
categorizing it as a
Yes.
sacrifice implies a
Perfect.
sort of willfulness that just doesn't exist in my
Perfectly said.
thinking.
Yeah. But it's also, like, timely because then they fucking shot down another plane. Like,
Yeah.
how could that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah.
Like, and then you see, I mean, I don't know if you've been following the work of, like, Hamed Esmailion,
Mhm.
where he's, like, now, he was just a dentist and
Yeah.
he doesn't wanna be in this position either, and his wife and kid were killed, and, like,
Yeah.
his whole life was completely upended, and
Yeah.
as someone with nothing to lose, he's, like, taking on this whole regime. So it is I'm sure I feel like that would have been really hard
Yeah.
as you're writing this book.
Well,
Um,
and I mean, and it would have been, there are similar stories 10 years ago in Iran, and there will still be stories 10 years from now, 50 years from now. I work with the Palestinian poet Mosab Abu Taha, who has a new book out, and we work together a lot over Zoom on this new poetry book. And there's a way in which, that book, of course, feels very urgent and timely now, but it would have felt urgent and timely 20 years ago, and it will
Yeah.
feel urgent and timely in 50 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because this happened. This
Right.
is a thing that our species can do, right?
Right.
The capacity for this lives inside every one of us. There's no one who is above this, right?
Right.
And so that the idea of, um, I mean, I hope that the book feels urgent now. I hope that people are drawing these connections, and I'm gratified by your making these connections. And also, I mean, people have been talking this way for decades. People will
Right.
for centuries, right? The earliest
Right.
attributable author of our species, Enheduanna, um, in present day Iraq, but was a sort of Sumerian priestess who wrote about being exiled, and wrote about, she's writing about being a refugee, right? What could be
Right.
more contemporary, right? Like this
Right.
is arguably the precipitating subject of all of our species literature,
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
And so, it is a privilege to get to be a whisper into this conversation that has preceded me by millennia and will continue long after the last person forgets my name.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good point. And okay, so now really the final thing I usually ask is like, what is your hope for Iran for the future? Like, do
Hmm.
you have any hope to be able to go or to be able to experience being there? Or sounds like
Yeah, again, I don't know if I'm just pessimist is never disappointed about it. But yeah, because of what I've written, and I've translated work by trans Iranian women still in Iran, and I've been, obviously I've been pretty openly critical of the regime in pretty Googleable ways. And I haven't served my compulsory military service. I'm only an Iranian citizen in their eyes because I was born there. And so, there's just a conspiracy of factors that seem to indicate that it will not be for me to experience again in this lifetime. But um, I hope, I don't know, hope for women, life, and freedom for everybody. You know what I mean? It sounds corny, but I can't improve upon that. You know what I mean? Like, I hope for autonomous free will for every sovereign citizen, for every person, for every heart beating sentient creature in Iran. I hope that um, I hope for the opportunity to pursue gladness for everyone and amongness.
yeah. Well, to end, how about give me a good quote about how amazing Iranians are? Just kidding.
Perfect, perfect.
Yeah,
Greatest
just end
civilization
with
on
like,
earth.
yeah, greatest.
You know, we invented algebra.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kaveh, thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you so
been,
much. This is such a
uh,
privilege, Layla.
yeah, of course. I still have 800 other questions, but another
No,
another
until in
time.
the fullness of time, we'll have ample opportunity. We'll take it on the road.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too.
Farada.
Thank you so much for listening to my interview with Kaveh Akbar. To find out more about Kaveh, check out the show notes for this podcast. We'll link to his website, social media pages, and of course to his book Martyr, which I hope you enjoy. And until next time, Khuda Hafiz from Layla.